Here's a thread connecting three very different stories today: the dazzling surface and the structure underneath that actually tells you what's going on. A jaw-dropping announcement about the biggest rocket launch site on Earth, and the fine print that decides whether it's a triumph or a burden. A frightening statistic about brain disease in football, where the real story isn't the number itself, but the clever, difficult way scientists finally figured out how to count it. And a discovery that finds hidden order beneath the apparent chaos of all animal life. In each one, the surface grabs your attention, but the understanding lives one level down. Let's start on the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, where a company just promised to build the future. SpaceX, Elon Musk's rocket company, has unveiled a genuinely staggering plan. It announced it will build a massive new spaceport in Louisiana, near Pecan Island in Vermilion Parish, with a price tag of around $100 billion, and the ambition is almost hard to comprehend. The company says this site, to be called Starbase, Louisiana, will eventually host more than 30 launches of its enormous Starship rocket per day, with over a dozen launch towers spread across a facility covering 195 square miles. Musk declared it would be the biggest launch site on Earth, and said the company is preparing to build a spaceport that until now has only existed in science fiction. Louisiana's governor stood alongside the announcement, hailing what's described as potentially the largest capital investment in the state's history, projected to create more than 3,000 jobs. For a state that has never hosted a single orbital launch, this would be a transformation into perhaps the busiest launch hub on the planet. Because there's real substance and real ambition to respect. If even a fraction of this comes true, it's a serious deal. High-paying jobs, cutting-edge industry, and a role in humanity's expansion into space, including NASA's plans to return to the moon. Reusable rockets that can be caught and reflown are a genuine engineering achievement that has already lowered the cost of reaching orbit. So this isn't vaporware from a nobody, it's an aggressive plan from the company that currently dominates the global launch business. Now, let me put on the critical hat and read the fine print underneath the dazzling headline, because that's where the real story of a mega announcement always is. First, the gap between the promise and the timeline. Read the dates carefully. Construction isn't expected to even begin until around the end of next year, and the first launch from this site is targeted for as soon as 2029. In the world of giant infrastructure and rockets, as soon as 2029 is a soft, optimistic number that has a way of sliding. And the rocket at the center of all this, Starship, is still in development. It has flown 13 test flights so far to varying degrees of success, which is a polite way of acknowledging that a number of them ended in spectacular explosions. The entire vision of 30 launches a day rests on Starship becoming a routine, reliable, fully reusable vehicle, including catching the upper spacecraft on its return, which has never been done. So this is a $100 billion promise built on top of technology that isn't finished yet. The announcement describes a destination. It does not guarantee the road. And this is the one I'd watch most closely. The environmental and human cost of putting this in that specific place. This isn't an empty desert. It's 195 square miles of the Louisiana Gulf Coast, one of the most ecologically sensitive and hurricane-vulnerable regions in the country. Louisiana's coast is already suffering some of the fastest land loss and coastal erosion anywhere on Earth. These are fragile wetlands, vital wildlife habitat, and home to fishing and shrimping communities. Now consider what SpaceX's other Starbase, in South Texas, has already shown us. That operation has drawn real scrutiny and environmental violations for its impact on the surrounding wetlands and wildlife refuges, from debris to water discharges to disruption of protected species. Now imagine scaling that up to 30 launches a day. The noise, the heat, the debris, the traffic, the sheer industrial footprint on an even more fragile coastline. The 3,000 jobs are the part everyone will put on the billboard. The potential cost to the wetlands, the fisheries, and the people who live there is the fine print that tends to get left off. And third, there's a subtler thing worth flagging. The company town model. The name Starbase is borrowed from SpaceX's site in South Texas, which the company recently actually incorporated as its own official town. a municipality largely controlled by the company and its employees. So when a single corporation controls a 195 square mile zone, becomes the dominant employer and potentially the local government too, you have to at least ask the question about accountability. Who regulates the company when the company is effectively the town? Who weighs the community's interests against the company's when they're so entangled? That concentration of economic and even governmental power in one corporation's hands is a genuinely new dynamic worth watching, not with reflexive hostility, but with clear eyes. So here's my take. Give real credit for the ambition. I'm not going to sneer at building something extraordinary. And space access genuinely matters, but be a careful reader of the mega promise. $100 billion, 30 launches a day, biggest on Earth announcement is designed to dazzle, to generate exactly the kind of awestruck headline it got. The honest response isn't cynicism, and it isn't starry-eyed celebration. It's patience and specific questions. Will the timeline hold or drift? Will the jobs materialize at the promised scale? And crucially, who bears the environmental cost? And are they the same people getting the benefits? The announcement is the easy, glossy part. The delivery, the trade-offs, and the fine print are where you find out whether a grand promise becomes a grand achievement or a grand burden. The question I'll leave you with: when a powerful company promises to transform your community, how do you celebrate the opportunity without forgetting to read the contract? And that instinct, to look past the headline number to how it was actually arrived at, takes us to a very different story about football, brains, and one of the most important statistics you'll see this year. A major news study, published in the prestigious medical journal, the BMJ, has produced the most rigorous estimate yet of how common the brain disease CTE is among NFL football players. CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is a degenerative brain disease linked to repeated head impacts. And it can only be definitively diagnosed after death, by examining the brain. And the headline finding is sobering. At least 1 in 4 NFL players who died between 2016 and 2021, about 25%, were found to have had CTE. Now, this is a serious topic that affects real people and families. So I'm going to handle it carefully and factually, but I want to focus on something that makes this study genuinely brilliant, because understanding it will make you smarter about how to read every scary health statistic you encounter. Here's the problem this study set out to solve, and researchers actually have a name for it: the denominator problem. For years, you may have seen absolutely terrifying numbers about CTE in football. The most famous came from Boston University, which found the disease in around 92% of the former NFL players' brains they examined. 92% sounds apocalyptic, but here's the catch, and it's crucial. Those brains were donated precisely because the players or their families already suspected something was wrong, because the player had shown symptoms of dementia or mood problems before death. So that sample was massively skewed from the start. It's like standing outside a hospital's neurology ward, testing everyone who walks out, and concluding that 92% of all people have brain disease. You've only sampled the people who already had reason to be there. The 92% was real for that group, but it told you almost nothing about the risk for a typical player. That's the denominator problem. A percentage is a fraction, a top number over a bottom number. Everyone always quotes the scary top number: how many brains had CTE? But the honest question is the bottom number, the denominator, out of how many players total. Because you can't examine the brains of players who are still alive, or whose families never donated them. So what these researchers did is genuinely clever, and it's the heart of why this study matters. They built the denominator. They created a list of every single player who had appeared in at least one NFL game since 1949, then used death certificates and CDC data to identify all of them who died in a specific window, 2016 to 2021, arriving at a total of over 1,700 deceased players. That's the real bottom number. Then they looked at how many of those had donated their brains and been found to have CTE. By grounding the calculation in the full population of players rather than just the suspicious cases, they could finally estimate a real prevalence, at least 25%. Not 92%, but 25% honestly derived, which is a far more meaningful and trustworthy number, and still a genuinely alarming one. 1 in 4 is not a footnote. And here's what earns my real respect. The researchers were rigorously honest about the limits of even their own better number, and this is what good science looks like. They emphasized that 25% is a floor, a minimum, and the true figure is likely higher because they still couldn't examine every player's brain. But they also carefully cautioned in the other direction, that brain donation still wasn't random, that prevalence at death is not the same as prevalence among living players, and that these findings might not generalize to, say, high school or college players. There's another crucial nuance. The players in this sample died at an average age of around 66, meaning most of them played in an era before 2005, before the NFL acknowledged the severity of concussions and introduced newer safety rules, banning certain dangerous plays and changing kickoffs. As one researcher put it, this data may not represent the NFL in 2026. And one more sobering scientific point the study reinforces. The damage appears to be driven not just by dramatic concussions, but by the accumulation of countless smaller, subconcussive hits, the routine head contact of just playing the game. There's also, importantly, still, no validated test to diagnose CTE in a living person, which is its own hard problem. So my take. This is a landmark not because of the headline number, but because of the integrity of how it was built. Someone did the hard, unglamorous work of constructing an honest denominator, instead of just repeating a scary, skewed one. And that's the transferable lesson for you, far beyond football. The next time you see an alarming statistic, X% of people who did this got that disease, train yourself to ask the denominator question. Out of whom? Who was in the sample? And were they selected in a way that skews the result? That single question is one of the most powerful bits of media literacy you can own. This story is genuinely important for football's reckoning with player safety, and 1 in 4 is a number that deserves to be taken seriously. But the deeper gift here is a way of thinking. The scary top number gets the headline. The denominator underneath is where the truth actually lives. The question I'll leave you with: how many of the frightening statistics that have shaped your worldview would survive you asking calmly, out of whom? And that idea that there's a hidden, more truthful structure underneath a chaotic-looking surface brings me to my last story, which is, frankly, one of the most beautiful pieces of science I've come across recently. Consider a human being, an octopus, and a piece of coral. They could hardly seem more different. Different in shape, in intelligence, in almost every visible way. And yet, deep inside the cells of all three, their chromosomes still carry recognizable fragments of a genome inherited from a single common ancestor that lived more than 600 million years ago. And a remarkable new study, published in the journal Science Advances by an international team led by researchers at the University of Vienna, has just mapped how the DNA of the entire animal kingdom has been reshuffled across that vast stretch of time, and found something genuinely surprising underneath the apparent chaos. And the scale is breathtaking. They compared more than 5,800 genomes, spanning 4,454 animal species across 19 major animal groups, the largest comparison of its kind ever done across the animal tree of life. But, and this is the key, they didn't just look at which genes each animal has. They looked at how those genes are arranged along the chromosomes, the actual architecture of the genome. And to make sense of that ocean of information, they built a new framework they call evolutionary genome topology, which projects all that diversity onto a single map. And here's the beautiful finding. You might assume that over 600 million years, with chromosomes fusing, splitting, and rearranging countless times, the result would be pure chaos, every lineage a random mess. But that's not what they found. They found that animal genomes do not change randomly. Instead, they travel along a limited set of what the researchers evocatively call evolutionary highways, a constrained number of paths that genome architecture tends to follow. There's structure. There are rules. The apparent chaos of hundreds of millions of years of evolution resolves when you map it properly into recognizable routes. And there's a specific concept in here, I find genuinely fascinating, called fusion with mixing. When two chromosomes merge over evolutionary time, their genes get shuffled together, and crucially, that mixing generally can't be undone. It's an irreversible, one-way change. It's a bit like stirring cream into coffee. Easy to do, essentially impossible to unstir. And because these changes are irreversible, they leave permanent, readable traces in the genome, like footprints that reveal which highway a lineage traveled and when it took its exit. Those permanent traces are exactly what lets scientists reconstruct how different animal groups are related and the paths they took over deep time. Now, this might sound abstract, so let me connect it to why it actually matters beyond its sheer wonder. It's a powerful new tool for understanding life itself, a single map of how animal genomes are structured and related. Second, and very practically, the researchers stress it provides an important basis for the conservation of biodiversity. This map can flag evolutionarily distinctive lineages, genuinely unusual creatures like glass sponges or earthworms whose genomes took rare routes. That might deserve special protection precisely because they represent irreplaceable branches of life's history. And there's even a forward-looking angle. Understanding these rules doesn't just tell us about the past. It might help scientists anticipate the paths genome evolution can take. So my take on this one is pure appreciation, but with the thread that ties the whole day together. Here is a case where the surface, the dizzying, chaotic diversity of millions of animal species, looks like randomness, like noise. And underneath, when scientists did the enormous, patient work of mapping it properly, they found order, rules, constraints, highways, a hidden structure connecting a human to an octopus to a coral through 600 million years. That's the reward for looking underneath. The surface of life looks like chaos. The structure underneath is a map you can actually read. So let me tie all three together, because they're one idea wearing three very different costumes. A spaceport announcement whose dazzling surface hides a fine print of timelines and trade-offs and coastline. A frightening statistic whose real meaning is hidden in the denominator underneath it. And the chaos of all animal life, which hides a beautiful, readable structure of evolutionary highways. The surface is what grabs you. The big number, the scary percentage, the overwhelming diversity. And in every case, the thing actually worth knowing is one level down. The trade-off under the promise, the denominator under the statistic, the order under the chaos. We live almost entirely on the surface of things now. The headline, the announcement, the stat, the hot take, because the surface is fast and loud and built to grab you. But almost nothing important is actually settled on the surface. The spaceport's real story is in the contract. The health statistics' real story is in the sample. Life's real story is in the architecture of the genome. And the single habit that separates people who understand the world from people who are just reacting to it is the willingness to ask every time, what's underneath this? What's the fine print, the denominator? The hidden structure? It takes one more step, one more question, a little more patience than the surface wants from you. But that step is where understanding actually begins. Don't just read the headline of the world. Read its fine print. Take care of each other, and I'll see you next time.